Zoom. Now with the updated platform, I have to look around. Where is that thing? I want to say a few things before launching into today's talk, and then the plan is to offer these observations and then go through the next part of the sadhana together. And my hope is that what I share will help illumine or light up what the next part of the sadhana is about. But first, let's start with, as Community Refuge, we're a group that's dedicated to taking refuge and personal growth. And taking refuge in the core teachings of the Buddha of, I'm more like a river than a rock. So this, sense of personal, ongoing solid me is like a dream, right? It's not, it's something everyone experiences, and yet it's not solid like a rock, right? It's like more like a river than a rock. And when you begin to realize that there's no solid me, then the five promises or the five precepts are very useful. So many of us were talking or practicing the way we do in meditation is freedom, in the 9 stages of calm abiding, and we're using our attention to keep steering back to the middle of the road that we're on, of what we're trying to pay attention to. And we use the metaphor of windshield and steering wheel. Well, the precepts are very much like a combination of windshield and steering wheel. It's good to know that speaking truthfully helps build connection, and so you give up lying. And that being generous builds good society, and you give up the greed and the desire to take what's not yours. And I'm not going to go through the five precepts, but they are five guidelines for not only how to stay connected to the teachings of the Buddha, but how to live a reasonable and meaningful life. And often it gets forgotten as we're going through the teachings. It sounds like, oh, it's just this intellectual thing, but there's this very practical, here's how to live a life. And that simplifies it and helps you stay connected to the intelligence and the wisdom of the foundation, which is more like a river than a rock. And then also connected to the Great Way. And in the Great Way, there are more promises. And basically, the promise of the Great Way is, I'll look out for you first before I, take care of myself. So you first. Sakyong Mipam has a wonderful bit of teaching that he did in a song in which he said, here's the secret of happiness. You first, then me. Right? So that comes out of seeing that we're all connected, that everything is wide open and constantly changing, and that because we're all connected and we share so much, there's a natural level of sympathy or empathy, or it grows into compassion. And so the teachings that we're about to explore come out of taking refuge in those teachings and following the example of the Buddha and all of the master meditators who have gone before, and trying to embody them and live them out. So I just think that that's worth saying. In a more traditional way, I could say that the immediate way, or the Vajrayana, stands firmly and with agreement on the foundation teachings and the teachings of the Great Way, or the Mahayana. And if you find something in the Vajrayana that does not agree with the foundation or the Great Way, it's probably a misinterpretation or a misunderstanding, because it needs to, or else it's not Buddhism. So having said that, we're stepping into a series about sadhana practice, and this is a lightning review of where we've been for the last number of weeks. We started with a investigation of the sadhana is a means of spiritual training. So it's a practice that you do to get more and more connected with what it's like to be awake and open-hearted on the spot. So it's a training. The second thing we investigated was, well, it's possible to describe awake even as you recognize that your words are always and only just words. So they are like fingers pointing at the moon, They're not the moon. But the finger can sometimes be helpful. And so you can train. The sadhana offers a description of awake that's not intended to be exclusive or exhaustive. And then, there's an image of what that might be like. So it works with a lot of imagining and imagery. And then we talked about a hero story. So it's almost like watching a story or a movie about this is what it would be like to be awake. And one of the geniuses of the Vajrayana, or the immediate way, is that it uses the way your mind and my mind works. We're storytellers. We love stories. Human beings love stories. I love Netflix. I love novels. I love listening to things that are stories on the audio. When we get together, we tell ourselves stories. You ask somebody how they are, and if it's more than just fine, right, they'll tell you a story of this thing just happened, right? We're storytellers. And so we use that as a way to sort of open the door into, well, I could tell a story of being awake. And so the sadhana does that. And last week we looked where we start. And this takes us back to my opening remarks in a very symbolic Vajrayana way, immediate way. We take refuge and we arouse good-heartedness to start. Earth, water, fire, and all the elements, the animate and the inanimate, the trees, the greenery, and so on, all partake of the nature of the self-existing one, which is quite simply, the great wrathful one, which is, blah, blah, blah. I take refuge in these. Right, in the nature of reality, which is the expression of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, or Guru, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. Or if you want to make it more complex, there are three immediate way refuges of Guru, the meditational hero or yidam, and the protectors, the Guru, the yidam, and the dakini, right? Or the protectors, the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha. Like the list is get more and more elaborate. Right? But the same principle of we're taking refuge in awake open heart. Right? So here we are. We're going to look at the next part. And there were a couple of things that I wanted to say. So here's the main new piece for today. The new piece is actually a review of something that was covered a couple of times already. Here's the simplest way to say it. Awareness is awareness. Your awareness that you're experiencing right now is what it's like to be aware. With whatever sensations you're having, my shoulder's a little bit tender, whatever sounds you're hearing, whatever taste you're tasting, I can still feel the taste of coffee in my mouth. I still sense it. Whatever thoughts are going through your head, whatever emotions you're having, whatever memories are floating around, all of that, the entire world as you're experiencing it in your awareness, that's what it's like to be aware. There's no special other awareness somewhere out there in some perfect place that we're trying to get to. We're just trying to be aware. Aware that we are aware. Just aware. In a sense, that's what Mahamudra means. And so this is the sadhana of Mahamudra, a training in how to do that. So awareness is just aware. And the sadhana offers the ability of, you can use all kinds of, imagine yourself into it. So the question I asked at the very beginning, as an opening is what's your projection? And we had lots of projections, pain, good versus bad, feeling judged, feeling like I can't do it, I don't have the ability, projecting me onto everything, projecting anger, and then if you joined after the question had passed by, whatever you project onto the world. We all have projections. We're constantly projecting out our assessment, our judgment, our story, our hopes, our fears, our dreams, our expectations. We're projecting all of that onto what's happening. In my example that I offered, an example of stubbing my toe on a piece of furniture and then getting angry at the furniture. The furniture didn't do anything. that it wasn't doing all along, right? It was just furniture. But you stupid chair, what? Right? But we do that, some version of that all the time. We do it with things we love and with people we like and with things we fear and people we're resentful of. We do it all the time. I think that's a fairly straightforward proposal that we are constantly projecting onto the world, but we don't know it. And so the sadhana asks you to recognize that you're projecting and then project awake, like change the film. I'm going to say that again. So the first step was awareness is awareness. It's very straightforward and simple. Awareness is awareness. And the second is you could imagine or project, same idea, yourself awake. As opposed to one of the examples of projecting was I'm projecting me all over the place. Here's Brian with Brian's history. I find it very useful that Brian is actually my alias. It's not my given name. It's the name that I've gone by since I was 20. So for 50 years, I've had people call me this, but I was legally somebody else, right? It's just I like Brian better, right? So please call me Brian. But there's this, we project, right? Well, if I stop projecting that it's all about me and what I want you to think of me and how I want to experience the world, and maybe I could open up to the wide open possibility of everything that's happening. All the awareness that's possible, that's just awareness. Awareness is awareness. And so the sadhana as a training, here's the third thing I want to talk about, has all of these layers of detail and meaning. Now, the Sadhana of Mahamudra was written by Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. Chogyam Trungpa was born somewhere around the year 1940, right? So functionally, Tibet was still a medieval feudal society. He was both the chief reincarnate lama of an important monastery and the equivalent of the local governor. He was a noble. There were serfs, servants, layers of society, images in his society that were very complex. And so when he wrote the Sadhana of Mahamudra, all of those layers of imagery and meaning and details are in it. I'm going to try and say something about it that I hope offers a window. And then when we read through the next section, you'll get a sense of all the flavors. We could spend months exploring what each of the terms means, and I'm happy to do that. But I think it's more useful at this point to just get a general sense of the territory that we're being asked to imagine ourselves into. And so often in Community Refuge, we've talked about more like a river than a rock. The sadhana asks you to imagine that not only is there a rock, but for most of us, that rock has become as big as the biggest mountain you can imagine. It is monumentally big, my rock and your rock. So I'm just going to say my rock, monumentally big. And surrounding that rock is an entire world, bigger than a continent, of all the layers of complexity that my rock, my ego, my sense of holding on to Brian has built up. And I'll just invite you to think about. You can add in your details. I have my partner, my son, my house, the land that the house is on, the place where I live, the environment, my car, my pension fund. You start to go down the list, and there's all of these details we take for granted, but they are all projected onto this experience. And the way you know that they're a projection, well, there's one way you might know that it's a projection, that they're not permanent, they're not solid, they're not real. I've been thinking recently of writing a piece of what will happen the day after I die. Well, it won't be Brian's car anymore because I won't be here, right? And it won't be Brian's house. That used to be Brian's house. like there will be a shift. The sun will still come up, I hope. The birds will still sing in the morning, but I won't be hearing them, right? So that big rock-like projection of it's all about Brian and Brian's world will have dissolved. But for now, if you're like me, that feels compellingly real. And so the sadhana asks you to imagine that rock, and it's describing this mountain of ego. It calls it the rock-like mountain of Rudra, which there's a very long story about Rudra, but it's like the worst congealing of ego. Right? And that's surrounded by trees and greenery, and there's animals in the forest around the trees, and there's mystical beings and wandering yogis, and all kinds of things, right, that build up the world around my personal mountain, my rock-like mountain. And then on top of that mountain, so we're imagining ourselves into the story, is this amazingly big lotus. And the lotus is an image in Buddhism that invites you to think that that beauty is connected to all the sort of muckiness of the bottom of the lake or the pond in which the lotus is flowering from. And so all of the rock-like confusion of my projections, but also the possibility of opening my heart and awakening are there. They both come out of the same thing. And on top of that lotus, and I'm going to share here. Let's see if I can do that. On top of that lotus is this projection of awake energy in the form of this heroic story of Padmasambhava Karma Pakshi. Dorje Trollo, which is one of the titles of Padmasambhava, the rock crusher, undefeatable rock crusher. There's lots of ways to translate this, but let's go with rock crusher, right? And Karma Pakshi, who is one of the Karmapas. And he's riding, standing, dancing on the back of a pregnant tigress. And the tigress is trampling on the two aspects of ego. So there's a man and a woman, and the tigress is sort of biting the head of the man, and one paw on the back of the man, and another paw on the head of the woman. And they represent you're holding on to the rock, and he's dancing in that moment. He's got the outer robes of a monk, and the one that's most obvious is he's wearing this thing that looks like these little squares of gold and red. The outer robe of many Buddhist monks, it's called a patchwork robe. It actually was designed to show that they were poor, that their robes were made out of patches, and over the years they have, grown to be quite elaborate. But that's what it stands for. And that robe, the outer robe, which is sometimes called the Dharma robe or the robe of a Dharma holder, right, indicates that they have the wisdom to know the rock is not so real. Right? They've seen through ego in the foundation, and they've worked with the greater way teachings of radical, open, empty, full, giving birth to compassion. And so you're being asked with all of these details to sort of let your mind relax into experience awareness, and that's where the sadhana is going to take you, by using your ability to imagine yourself as being awake, as being this person, right? And then, all the details help you. I want to say a couple of other things, and we'll come back to this picture. Many of us find working with this quality of purposeful imagination a challenge. And I think we forget that there's lots of things we can imagine that we take for granted. If I ask you, for many of, I'm an American and a Canadian, but if I ask many of my American friends a political question, it is not hard for them to immediately jump into like this catalog of what they think, one side or the other. And yet, oh my goodness, it's hard to imagine the three robes of a fully ordained monk. but I can tell you everything that one candidate or the other said and what I think are their faults or their benefits or the weaknesses. So I'm able to hold all of that. The imagination exercise does two things. It's asking you to sharpen the intelligence, natural intelligence of being able to work with the detail. It sharpens the focus of your mind. And by imagining something that's rather exotic, that helps me let go of what I think of as the ordinary and the real. And third thing, because I'm making it up, it's easier to let it go. It's not a solid, real thing like the idea of being Brian to hold on to. And so you are going to imagine this being, identifying with this being, Dorje Trollo Karma Pakshi, who looks nothing like you and is surrounded by a world that is completely unlike your ordinary world. So that's part of the purpose. We're sharpening the ability of the mind to imagine so it can imagine awake better. We're letting go of thinking that our world and all of its projections are real. And then we're practicing with making it up and letting it go so that we're not even holding on to that. And that takes us to the open, empty, full quality of what it's like to be awake. So that's part of the training. So having said that, I want to go to the sadhana itself and go back to share. Sadhana of Mahamudra. Share. And we started with this refuge. Namo, earth, water, fire, and all the elements, the animate and the inanimate, the trees and the greenery, and so on, all partake of the nature of self-existing equanimity, which is quite simply what the great wrathful one is. In the spontaneous wisdom of the Trikaya, I take refuge with body, speech, and mind, in order to free those who suffer at the hands of the three lords of materialism and are afraid of external phenomena which are their own projections. I take this vow in meditation. Right? So that's basically the refuge and bodhisattva vow. Hum, 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 in the boundless space of suchness, in the play of the great light, all the miracles of sight, sound, and mind are the five wisdoms and the five Buddhas. This is the mandala which is never arranged but is always complete. It is the great bliss, primeval and all-pervading. Hum, it is boundless equanimity which has never changed. It is unified into a single circle beyond confusion. In its basic character, there is no longer any trace of ignorance nor of understanding. Nothing whatever, but everything arises from it, yet it reveals the spontaneous play of the mandala. There's one line here, nothing whatever, but everything arises from it. There's an alternative translation I've heard, nothing whatever, but it arises as everything. Also very illuminating. Like it's wide open and it arises as everything. Hum, hum, hum. My whole being is Dorje Trollo, and my form is Karma Pakshi. My speech is Mikyo Dorje, and my mind is Rangjung Dorje. With that unwavering conviction, fearlessly enjoy the Mahamudra. And we've been talking about Mahamudra. Awareness is awareness. And attain the experience of Mahaati. Hum, hum, hum. So that's what we talked about last week, and if you missed that, you might look at the video. There was a long talk about that, and here we go into this next section of the sadhana, which is the beginning of the imagining, sometimes called visualization. Right? In the state of non-meditation, all phenomena subside in that great graveyard in which lie buried the complexities of samsara and nirvana. This is the universal ground of everything. It is the basis of freedom and also the basis of confusion. It arises from the depth of the muck, right, as the lotus. Within it, the Vajra anger, the flame of death, burns fiercely and consumes the fabric of dualistic thoughts. The black river of death, the Vajra passion, turbulent with massive waves, destroys the raft of conceptualization to the roaring sound of the immeasurable void. The great poisonous wind of the Vajra ignorance blows with all-pervading energy like an autumn storm and sweeps away all thoughts of possessiveness and self like a pile of dust. So if you actually do this training, there's not a lot of room for ego to hang out. Whatever you see partakes of the nature of that wisdom which transcends past, present, and future. From here came the Buddhas of the past. Here live the Buddhas of the present. This is the primeval ground from which the Buddhas of the future will come. This is the heavenly realm of the Dakinis, the sacred charnel ground of the blazing mountain. But you won't find ordinary earth and rocks here, even if you look for them. All the mountains are Buddha Lochana, who is the all-pervading wisdom of equanimity and unchanging stillness. This is the realm in which the distinctions between meditation and the post-meditation experience no longer occur. In this fearless state, even if the Buddhas of the 3 times rise against you, you will remain in the indestructible Vajra nature. The water which flows here is the Buddha Mamaki, who is the lake of mirror-like wisdom, clear and pure as though the sky had melted. Here is the joyous river, which is the transcendent form of the 8 kinds of consciousness. It flows into the great purity which goes beyond clean and unclean. More like a river than a rock. So here's the rock. In the various parts of the charnel ground, and charnel ground was an ancient burial ground, and it was the poor people's burial ground, where in many ways it's not universally true. They would just take the bodies and leave them there for the wild animals and the elements to consume, right? And so we're describing, it's an image of the experience, and it's sort of like in your life, everything is eventually going to be consumed by the world, including us, right? In the various parts of the charnel ground, and all these details, I'm not going to get stuck in who all these people are and what these mythical beings are. It's just trying to invite you to understand that there's a pretty big world around our own personal rock mountain. In the various parts of the charnel ground can be seen the terrifying trees which are the protecting Mahakalis, Rangjung Yalmo, Dorje Sadrumpa, Tasulma, and Ekajati. In these trees, vultures, ravens, hawks, and eagles perch, hungry for meat and thirsting for blood. They represent the concept of good and evil. Until you stop clinging to this concept, the Mahakalis will continue to manifest as friendly goddesses and harmful demons. As long as you organize life around good and evil, me and them, you're going to have enemies and friends. Various animals roam about, tigers, leopards, bears, jackals, and dogs, all howling and jumping up and down excitedly. They represent the different kinds of perception. Here too are the chutans. Chutans are like a burial monument, right, of the awakened state of mind where the great yogis live. They represent the supernormal powers which need not be sought. So you have sense perceptions and supernatural powers that are possible, but not necessary. In the middle of this heavenly realm is a huge rock mountain which arose from the corpse of the Rudra of ego. It is triangular in shape and it pierces the skies. It is dignifying and awe-inspiring and radiates the blue light of Vajrasattva. So it's big and it has the possibility of awakening. That's the blue radiance. On top of this mountain is the red triangle, which can accommodate all apparent phenomena and the whole of existence. This is the primeval ground where the question of samsara and nirvana does not arise. It is the beginning and the end of everything. The triangle radiates the blazing red light of inner warmth and compassion. Above the triangle is a beautiful flower, 100-petaled lotus in full bloom, exuding a delicate scent. It is the lotus of discriminating wisdom. Here is the moon of great bliss and skillful means, and here is the sun of wisdom and shunyata. So your ego presents the possibility of waking up. And quite simply, if you're not here, you can't wake up. It's pretty simple, right? And you being here is all of these senses and experiences and whatever. And then this other detail about the triangle and the lotus, very esoteric, lots of meanings and layers of complexity in it. But the triangle is everything that happens, you could wake up with as it flows by like a river, right? And then the lotus, and that's happening right out of your experience with all of its goodness and its badness, its ugliness and its beauty. The whole tragic comedy of life offers your possibility of waking up. And then from that, the sonorous voice of silence is heard. From it appears the rainbow body of wisdom. Now, rainbows, there's so much to say about every detail here, but they're not solid. They're very vivid, very magnetic. You know, I've never met somebody who hates rainbows, right? I, that would be interesting, right? But the rainbow sort of is like, oh, it appears, but it's not a thing. It's this experience, right? So the what you're going to imagine is like a rainbow or a hologram, if I can use a 21st century example. It's vivid, but it's not solid. You could pass your hand through it if it appeared in front of you. This is the personification. So now we're imagining Dorje Trello Karma Pakshi. This is the personification of the body, speech, and mind of all the Buddhas. He is the self-born teacher, the Lord of the Herukas. Much things to say about Herukas, but you could think of it as the masculine energy of awakening. Padma Tutring, the Lama whose power extends over all apparent phenomena and the whole of existence. He is Karma Pakshi, in whom are unified the unchanging mind of the Guru, the wisdom of the Yidam beyond waxing and waning, and the protectors, the confused thoughts which have returned to nakedness. That's actually a really important line. We want to fight with our confused thoughts, but your confused thoughts can remind you of awakening if you let them. So for those of you who've done stage 8 of meditation is freedom, this is the flowing quality, constantly self-reminding, right? He is dark red in color, symbolizing the oneness of everything within compassion. He is inseparable from peacefulness, and yet he acts whenever action is required. He subdues what needs to be subdued, he destroys what needs to be destroyed, and he cares for whatever needs his care. His anger, devoid of hatred, is as fierce and terrible as if the three worlds were on fire. His presence is overwhelming. His 3 eyes of wisdom are bloodshot and stare in all directions. Did I mention that he's made out of light like a rainbow? Right? His 3 eyes of wisdom are bloodshot and stare in all directions. They radiate light, outshining the sun and moon. His expression is wrathful, and he bites his lower lip. He has a black triangular beard, shiny and twisted into a point, emitting sparks of fire. In his right hand, raised to the heavens, he holds a 9-pointed dorje of meteoric iron, emitting a storm of red sparks, each in the form of the letter hum. So it's like a symbolic thunderbolt, right? In his right hand. Thus he subdues spiritual pride. In his left he holds a purba, which is like a triangular pointed dagger, also of meteoric iron, emitting a shower of sparks in the form of thousands of mahakalas. The purba pierces through the heart of subductive passion. He wears the 3 robes of a bhikshu, which is like the skirt, the it's like a slip, a skirt, and an outer robe. Whenever we see monks, they have a shirt, but that was an addition because Tibet was cold. Originally, it was the slip, the skirt, and the outer robe. Right? He wears the 3 robes of a bhikshu, signifying the accomplishment of discipline, meditation, and wisdom. He is the originator and master of all Buddha activity, hence he wears the black crown, bright with gold and blazing with unceasing light, emitting a steady stream of discs of light in 5 different colors, which are the 5 Buddhas. He stands on a dakini, and this part, I said like the Heruka is the masculine energy. He is enthroned and inseparable from the tigress that he is riding. The feminine and the masculine in balance and together. Right, with his right leg bent and his left leg extended in the Heruka posture. Right? Even the thought of him will destroy the mountain of conceptualizations. The sight of him dries up the ocean of dualistic clingings. He is immersed in flames which radiate the intense heat of compassion. In his forehead center is the unchanging form of Arochana, who is Tusum Kempa, the Dharmaraja of the 3 worlds, clad in bhikshu robes, so the same 3 robes, with his hands in the meditation posture, holding a dorje. He has white hair and a thin dark face. His expression is wise and peaceful. He wears the black crown, ornamented with a gold Dharma wheel, the Dharma chakra, which sends out rays of light. He is seated cross-legged on the back of an elephant. He's completely mastered calm abiding and the Mahamudra that arises from it. Right? In his throat is another one of the karmapas, and it's like this image of light, and then inside of him are other images, right? In the throat center of Karmapakshi is Mikyo Dorje, the Lord of Speech, the unceasing voice of the Buddha of compassion, of Amitabha. He is of orange color. He wears a tiger skin around his waist and a shawl of human skin around his shoulders. So those two elements represent overcoming arrogance and pride, right? The tiger skin around his waist is overcoming arrogance, and the human skin shawl represents overcoming pride. He wears own ornaments of bone and jewels. In his raised right hand, he holds the sword of wisdom, which cuts off the root of the universal unconscious. He gets to the root of me and pulls the weed. In his left hand, level with his heart, he holds the vessel which contains the treasure of the Dharma. His face radiates friendliness. One glimpse of it suffices to open the door of confidence. The thought of him awakens memory. As the lord of the Padma family, he wears the black crown ornamented with a golden lotus, radiating the red light of Amitabha. He is seated on a white lion. In the heart center of the great wrathful one is the king of the Buddhas, of the Tathagatas, Rangjung Dorje, the Vajrasattva nature of never-ending awareness. Awareness is awareness, constantly flowing like a river. He is blue in color, with serene and friendly face, expressing the state which transcends the boundary between meditation and non-meditation. By a glimpse of his face, the wisdom of the mind transmission is established in one's heart. His three eyes gaze into fathomless space. He has achieved the highest state of simplicity and is therefore seen naked, seated cross-legged, with hands in the meditation posture, holding a skull cup filled with Amrita. He is the King of Kings and possessor of the indestructible Vajra Abhisheka, and therefore wears the black crown, bright with gold and ornamented with the Vajra. The blue light of Samantabhadra, the all-good, shines from the crown in the primordial state in which neither liberation nor confusion has ever arisen. And I'm just going to pause for a second. Like all of this detail, there's not a lot of room to hold on to Brian. That's the point. And if you're saying, I have a hard time doing this, let go of I. Try again. Around Karmapakshi, the great host of Buddhas and the Sangha, together with the utterance of Dharma, fills the sky. They are surrounded by the Dharmapalas and Dakinis, the masculine and feminine embodiments of awakening. The sound of hum and ah and pat shakes the sky. It is though all the musical instruments of the universe were being played simultaneously. And then here's awareness as awareness. Whatever you see is the form of Karmapakshi run wild. I'm going to read it straight, and then I'll read it again with an interpretation. Whatever you hear is the voice of Karmapakshi let loose. Whatever you think is the thought of Karmapakshi unleashed. In the spontaneously existing state, where meditation is effortless, all movements are the Vajra dance, and all sound is the Vajra music. It is the great Guru Mandala. And now I'm going to give you my interpretation of that. Whatever you see, that's awake. Whatever you hear, that's the sound of awake. Whatever you think, that's awake showing as thoughts. In this spontaneous state, meditation is effortless, and everything that happens that you think, hear, feel, remember, or know, that's awake. That's the world of this teacher, right? And then in this way, rest the mind in the Mahamudra of devotion with great trust and single-mindedness. One's mind should be free from pettiness and doubt. Good encouragement. The pettiness is, I can't do it. I'm not good enough. This isn't real. And the doubt, is this true? Right? It's like, hopefully we're way past that because we're in the immediate way. We've taken refuge in the Buddha. We know that we're the river, more like the river than the rock. So is the world. Our hearts are open. We're connected with everything. And then we're imagining ourselves into this experience of awake. And so one last thing to do as I stop that share and I go back to the image of Dorje Trollo, right? This is the outer image. And then this is like a, I mean, you can't do it in a painting. It looks solid in a painting, but it's a body made of light like a rainbow. And inside of this body, if you look closely enough, you would see uh, Tusum Kempa at the forehead, Mikyo Dorje at this throat center, and Rangjung Dorje at his heart center, like an image inside of an image. Impossible to paint, but that's the idea. At least this painter didn't paint it that way. So that's a lot. And I'm very aware that what we're doing for some of you is brand new. And for others of you, it might be a big stretch. And so that's okay. If you want to just let this go, there's no need for you to do this, right? It's just an exploration we're doing here on Sundays until the beginning of August. But if you do want to do this, then instead of giving up, so this is my coaching mind, because I used to do executive coaching, instead of giving up right away, choose one thing to work with. And then that's where we begin with the question I asked at the very beginning, like, what's your projection? And then you go, oh, I'm projecting. Happy and sad, good and bad, friend and foe, piece of furniture that was in the wrong place, anger, right? I'm projecting. And as soon as you notice the projection, you could begin to ask yourself, is this an awake projection? Or is this me making a mountain out of my rock? With that, I'm going to pause the recording. Um,